What we do at Covestro is we anthropomorphize a lot. And why do we do that? We truly believe, and I truly believe, that AI is just another colleague. It's as curious and courageous and colorful as we as Covestro are.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to and watching another episode of The Chief AI Officer. Today I'm speaking with Nils Janus, who's Chief AI Officer at Covestro, one of the world's leading manufacturers of high-quality polymer materials. Nils, thanks so much for chatting with me today and joining from Germany.
Ben, hey, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Much looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, you've written a lot on the topic, and you obviously spend every day living and breathing AI. So I'm very, very interested to hear what you have to say. I think before we dig into really a lot of the things that you're doing at Covestro at a high level and kind of reflecting on your long journey with AI, can you just share a moment with our audience what was that moment where you first truly recognized the potential that it might have in life and in business?
When you're asking specifically really about industrial applications, I think it was when DeepMind released AlphaGo, when AlphaGo finally beat Lee Sedol. And why am I saying that? Because academically, we have done some great things in machine learning, in neural networks in the 1980s, the 1990s, the early 2000s. But in the middle of 2010, something happened, and AlphaGo epitomized that in the sense that it really it solved something that was so profoundly complex, like the game of Go, that all of a sudden we had a conversation start with a lot of colleagues in business by saying, listen, AI can solve fiercely complex challenges as proven by AlphaGo, and you have fiercely complex challenges, be them in manufacturing, be them in finance, be them in supply chain. And all of a sudden, people opened up at least to the idea of machine learning or AI potentially being a solution to the business challenges they face.
Is that a moment where you feel like it kind of left the realm of academia and really took a place in the seat of executive, boardrooms? People were finally saying, we have to do something here?
For a few people, it did. And not all across the company, because, as I said, it was a conversation starter about what types of complexities AI was able to handle and to manage and to solve for us. But then the conversation quickly shifted into, but we are dealing with different kinds of complexities. No, we are even more complex. Have you seen our contracts? Have you seen our legal frameworks and all that? So no, this was a very early starting point that enabled a conversation. This moment where people actually held that this is something different at the end of the day was November 22, the release of ChatGPT to the world, where really for the first time it came from this purely theoretical, mathematical realm of the data scientists and the machine learning engineers saying to the folks, well, trust us. We know it's right. To everyone, also executives being in a position to experience it themselves without prior knowledge in mathematical modeling, in coding, in scientific reasoning or whatsoever. So that was really the defining moment where it received broad attention.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's AlphaGo, while the people that know the game and understand the complexity and what was done there, it's hard for people to really latch on to that. And the experience of GPT was so different to the end consumer that it's what's created such a craze today. I mean, speaking of that, how would you describe the current state of, AI today and how its integration into the business world in particular in a complex area like industrial manufacturing?
I think we are in the early stages. Obviously, AI, like most technologies, is going to develop on an S-curve, and the integration is going to happen on the S-curve. Where we are on the S-curve, all that's hard to say. My feeling is we're early. We're early in adopting it. We are early in understanding how transformational it can be to our existing business model or to future business models that we haven't even thought of. What we do at Covestro, though, is we apply AI as broadly as possible. There is not a single department, there's not a single part of the value chain that is being excluded, because we feel there are untapped value pockets across the whole value chain of Covestro, be it research and development, be it central functions, be it manufacturing, be it logistics, be it finance, be it legal frameworks, be it contractual negotiations. So far, we have uncovered a lot of these value pockets, even though we're still early.
Yeah, I mean, and how do you, as Chief AI Officer at Covestro, you obviously oversee a lot of that integration. You're touching on, as you said, pretty much every department in a very large company, right? So many different use cases, so many different roles. How do you even begin to manage that? Obviously, you have the expertise in AI, but then everyone is their expert in their own department. What does that look like at Covestro?
I've been with Covestro for a little over 6 years now, and very, very early on, I was completely upfront about me not having expert knowledge in chemistry, not having expert knowledge in chemical manufacturing or chemical process engineering. I'm a mathematician. This is what I know well. This is what my colleagues know well. And we always push hard for the teaming up approach. That means throw together a bunch of experts from, as I said, R&D or from chemical process engineering with some experts from the data science or AI domain, and then develop something greater than each of them in isolation could develop. This took a while to take hold, but now, a couple of years later, the use case portfolio is overflowing with ideas. It's overflowing for the capacity we have. And with ChatGPT and Gen AI now coming into the picture, the demand and the interest is even broader. So this brings us into a position to explore all these new interesting features that Gen AI brings, while continuing to delivering on promises and ideas we've made in the past couple of years. And that's an excellent position to be in.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. Have you seen a shift from that more, I guess, top down, here's how we're going to improve efficiency, like change our processes using AI, to, as you just mentioned, right, this more bottom up, I want to be involved in an AI project, like let's do something here?
Oh, we started completely bottom up, because when I started out and founded the department in Covestro, exactly for the challenges I mentioned earlier, I didn't know the company, I didn't know the industry. The colleagues that I hired that I onboarded were in the same position. We did it purely bottom up. Also to prove a point that machine learning and AI can be a solution to the challenges that we have. Now that we have proven that a couple of times and have shown also the economic and monetary impact on the balance sheet of Covestro, we are combining that with a more strategic and top-down approach. Albeit, a top-down approach for me does not mean this is the 5-year roadmap that we now need to implement, because I don't believe that such a roadmap exists for any company. I've been in this space including academia, for 20 years, and I can't predict the current development more than 6 or 8 months ahead. So how would I be in a position to define a 5-year roadmap? So what we have chosen instead is a bit of a combination between the two approaches. We do 6-month game plans that span a long time frame that we can oversee, and then see, well, okay, what if we learn in the 6-month time frame and adapt for the next game plan? This allows us to, on the one hand side, have some sort of strategic planning and have a plan versus actual discussion, yet at the same time remain the agility that we need to have in order to include all the great ideas that are now popping up. Because when we prioritize our use cases, we do it exclusively by value contribution. That means measurable impact to the balance sheet of Covestro, and meaning that today I don't know if tomorrow or next week from now another great idea might pop up that we simply haven't included. Well, then at the very latest in 6 months from now, that it will be part of the game plan and we will implement.
even your ability to predict 6 to 8 months in the future is incredible in this kind of a field. It's a tough thing to do, but I completely agree with you. I think planning beyond that is almost a fool's errand with how quickly the field is changing. I mean, I love you mentioned contribution to, the balance sheet, like things that you can tangibly measure, and also kind of adopting almost like a use case portfolio approach to all of this. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? What does that look like? How do you measure things, especially when they're across such a wide range of use cases and departments? How do you make that choice, and what are you looking at?
Very early on, the biggest discussions that we had, and the biggest hurdle we had to overcome, was we're not looking for a business case. Because a business case, in essence, is a monocausal relationship promising someone, you give me X and the output will be Y. But in data science, we still have to follow the scientific principle, meaning we have to do an experiment in order to know what the result of the experiment is. So what we have adopted is a 3-stage framework. It starts with an economic value hypothesis. And an economic value hypothesis simply means this is a challenge that we currently have as Covestro. And if that challenge would go away, this is the value mechanics, how it would show up in the bottom line or in the top line or in margins, without any sort of promise that we can actually tackle that. This we use to prioritize our idea portfolio. Then we move into the experimental phase, and some of the experiments prove successful. Then we move on. Some of them simply don't, because there's not enough signal in the data, or we don't have the right amount of data, or we're unable to extract the signal from the data to do something meaningful to address the challenge. In the positive case, where we say, okay, now we have a defined challenge, including the value mechanics. We also now have experimental proof that we have found a solution for this challenge. Then we're talking about implementing it and fusing it together with the existing business process, or redesigning the existing business process. Because only if we do that, it will actually have an effect that is then measurable to then show up on the balance sheet.
Yeah, I love that. It's a very thoughtful and, as you said, empirical way of finding what are the best things to focus on, what to prioritize, and eventually, how to implement that. How do you, can you give some specific examples of those types of projects and what that entails at Covestro?
When we look at a core piece of our value creation is, and this is basically our business model in a nutshell, we purchase smaller molecules and then we make larger molecules out of them. And these larger molecules have much cooler properties than the smaller molecules have. And this, from small molecule to large molecule, this happens in our chemical plants. Now, these are world-scale plants with hundreds of kilotons of yearly output, some of them. Yet, one of the single biggest challenges is we have highly nonlinear chemistry. We have highly nonlinear production processes, and combining these several steps of nonlinearity usually means we don't always produce at the theoretically optimum capacity. And what we simply did, we incorporated all the knowledge that we had from first principle models that we've designed over the past couple of decades, and they work really well. And that, together with all the sensor readings that we have with our plant, we trained a machine learning model that learned how this production process actually should be ran optimally, and then combined these two to give real-time predictions to the plant operators saying, well, these 5 set points that you have an influence over, if you influence them in the following way, then your golden batch ratio increases, meaning we get more finished goods or finished product out of the same steel and iron with the same amount of raw materials. And in some of the plants that we did that, the increase was between 3 to 5%, which is on a world scale plant, something really, really cool, because this is very quickly a multi-million euro effect on the balance sheet. So this is one particular use case. Completely different use case from another part of the area is finance and how we steer our liquidity. Now, usually like large multinationals, we get a lot of payments in a lot of different currencies, and then we still have to remain solvent and liquid, and we hold liquidity lines at partner bank because we can't, to the day, predict what liquidity requirements we are going to have. And here, based on all the historical data that we have at Covestro, we train a model to even better predict our liquidity demands than our human colleagues could, which allowed us to lower our liquidity lines at our partner banks. And these examples, which have nothing in common whatsoever, apart from being executed within the same company, they just show the vast applicability of AI at a company like Covestro.
Yeah, those are two wonderful examples at different sides of the spectrum. And I love how, again, you've tied it so deeply to, what happens on the balance sheet, what is it doing to our profit margins. And like you said, 3 to 5% at that scale is massive. I've talked to a lot of sensor companies, manufacturing companies that say even 0.001% at the end of the day might be the difference between having to invest in a new plant or being able to just run more optimally so it can have a massive impact on capital at the end of the day. In that, you also talked about first principles thinking and systems and combining neural systems, kind of machine learning systems. I've also read an article where you mentioned that before. Is that how you approach this technology? Can you talk a little bit about that hybrid approach?
I really feel hybrid modeling combines the best of two worlds. And why am I saying that? Obviously, I don't have extensive domain knowledge, so I'm leaning more on the data-driven side of things. But again, thinking back to how does it impact our profitability or our balance sheet? As a machine learner, I find it tremendously exciting when a model, simply from observations, can learn that if we keep volume constant and increase pressure, the temperature rises. I find it incredible that a model can learn that just from observation. But we've known that for 100 years. So the practical value of a model learning that is zero. So wherever we have good first principle models that already capture decades and decades of research and development in our plants, it would be foolish if we wouldn't use that to constrain the machine learning models, to allow them to converge faster, to allow them to converge at more useful solutions, and again, kind of to constrain the space in which the machine learning model then seeks an optimal solution.
I guess in academia, in technology, we always talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And learning from the past. Why not have a machine also learn in the same way? It makes perfect sense. Another thing that I see a lot, as I've gone through Covestro and a lot of the work that's happening in AI is a commitment to climate neutrality and kind of enhancing quality of life, which is not something you always see from an industrials manufacturer, right? By the way, as an aside, that description you had of making small molecules, bigger molecules, and having them do cooler things is one of the best descriptions I've seen of industrials manufacturing. But what are some of the AI-driven initiatives or use cases in the kind of climate neutrality space that excite you the most?
One of the side effects of the use case I've mentioned earlier in our plants means whenever we increase our golden batch ratio, means we have fewer scrap, we have fewer B-grade and or off-spec and off-grade production, meaning overall we simply utilize less raw materials to produce the same finished goods. This is great. Then secondly, as you can imagine, we are an energy-intense industry that uses various different primary energy sources. And what we have done in the past is we always targeted maximum capacity for every single plant because it was simply too complex to arrive at a global optimum of energy consumption of different sources versus individual utilizations of our plants in a large network site or even in a global supply network like Covestro. Now, thanks to machine learning and to AI, we have that ability. We can say, no, from a site perspective, we can actually, and we have lowered our demand for primary energy sources like steam, because we can much more intelligently steer different plants within the same site and simply let our plant operators know, hey, if you just hold off relaunching your process for another 45 minutes, then a very high energy intensity process at the other end of the site that you're currently unaware of will be finished, and we will overall have a much smoother energy consumption and lower our energy consumption in the process. Thirdly, and this will be the most disruptive one for us as Covestro and our industry. In the past, what I described is a purely linear business model, right? We take small molecules, a lot of energy, larger molecules, and then we're done. And in some cases, we at least incinerated them to get some of the energy that is stored in the larger molecules back. Now, what we have proven already for a couple of our products is that we can reverse the process. So we take the larger molecule and we break it down into smaller molecules, really on the molecular level, again, so as to repeat the cycle rather than discarding it, incinerating it, and drawing from new fossil sources again. So the goal for Covestro, the big challenge for this century really is to achieve true circularity in all of our products.
Yeah, and it sounds like AI will be a big part of that journey. So you will also be a big part of that journey. By definition at Covestro. I mean, there are so many use cases, there's so much opportunity. That also always means there's a lot of challenges, there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. How are you addressing that, in terms of adopting the technology? And then also, do you find resistance at times, where this is always about technology and humans, right? You mentioned even in your plant example that, the technology is informing a human decision maker at the end of the day, which is making a decision. How do you deal with all of that at Covestro?
Whereas in the past, when we were only talking about specialized AI, the adoption piece was easier because in the plant example, we had to convince a handful or a dozen of people, because those are the only ones that interacted with the model. Now with Gen AI, all of a sudden we're talking about 20,000 people that need convincing to just give it a try. And what we do at Covestro is we anthropomorphize a lot. And why do we do that? We truly believe, and I truly believe, that AI is just another colleague. It's as curious and courageous and colorful as we as Covestro are. And the example I like to give is when we think back of the early 2000s, where a lot of multinationals started staffing international teams, right? You had someone in the US, you had someone in South Africa, you had someone in East Asia, different time zones, different cultural upbringings. And for the first couple of months, it felt really weird. It was like, how can this ever work? We have this one person who always dominates the conversation because this is the cultural upbringing of that person. We have someone who doesn't speak English as a first language or a second language, same with German or other languages. So it was the same thing, like, how should this ever work? Now, fast forward 20 years, and no one is questioning that international teams do work, right? And I predict that we will go through the same adoption phases with AI. Yes, currently we're in that stage where to a lot of people it feels foreign. They have a lot of questions. Why does AI answer like that? What does it think? It's a philosophical question. Why does it do it like that? And once we move past that, Once we accept the black box approach, it will be much easier for us to just have a meaningful collaboration with AI, much like we have with our international colleagues distributed around the globe.
Yeah, I guess it's that old adage of, technology is fully embraced when it becomes invisible, right? You don't notice it anymore at all. That will inevitably become the case as well. In that process, though, in a company as large as Covestro, there are ethical challenges as well, right, in deploying AI in your operations. Particularly, you're from Germany, the home of GDPR, right? There are data privacy, manipulation risk. There's all sorts of challenges there. How are you dealing with that at Covestro?
So on the one hand side, when we talk really about general guardrails and ethical guidelines for the virtual assistant that we build and that we employ here, we already see the transformation of existing roles, for example, in HR. Again, anthropomorphizing it, if I were to behave contrary to corporate guidelines, well, I would get stick from my manager and from HR, and for good reason. Apply the same principle to AI and to large language model, and the same applies. HR knows our ethical guidelines best. So they are responsible for actually ensuring that the guardrails around our Gen AI solutions we have in place, that they abide by what we consider ethical use at Covestro. That's one part of the answer. The second part of the answer goes more to the regulatory framework that we have now in Germany with the EU AI Act, and completely different approaches to regulations in the US with the US executive order, and in China where it's more fragmented framework, or in Asia in general. And the big question that we are currently contemplating is, will we continue to shoot for a global governance framework at Covestro for this topic, or will we move towards a minimum governance framework approach that allows regional top-ups? And I can see the second option as really, really realistic, because if we feel, and this is what we are currently researching, if we feel that empathetical AI allows or drives more well-being in our staff, but we are not allowed to employ that in the European Union, why shouldn't we make it available in those jurisdictions where we can? Again, we as Covestro, we have to be convinced that this is net positive for our 20,000 colleagues, or at least those outside of the European Union. But here we don't have a firm decision yet. But I personally, I lean strongly towards this. Let's make minimum governance framework and then regional top-ups as allowed by the respective regulations.
Yeah, I guess that fits well with your kind of whole framework of, if it can create value in some use case, in some department, then it should be used, right? And so if there's a regulatory framework that enables you to do that somewhere, then why not embrace it? I think that's a very sensible approach to take. I mean, you mentioned the 6-month kind of being the planning cycle for your AI use cases. Planning for 5 years is impossible, particularly in this field. But do you have a longer term strategy or first principles when it comes to how you think about AI and its integration in your operations?
We have several mantras that we follow. And when we talk Gen AI, for example, we feel it is tremendously important that within the next 3 years, we move 90% of current human system interaction to human assistant interaction. Why am I saying that? We need to move away from this paradigm that if you have the desire to create a purchase order, but don't know how to use your particular ERP system, then you're out of luck. This creates so many inefficiencies in a company. If I want to have a purchase order created, it should just be created. I don't want to remember in which particular transaction my particular ERP system does that. I just want to tell my virtual assistant, like I tell my human assistant, please be so kind as to filing that purchase order for me. And this is something that scales to everyone at Covestro. So here, this is the first paradigm for Gen AI, replace human system with human assistant interaction. When we talk plans and other business processes, we measure the level of decision authority and autonomy we give to machine learning models and to AI agents in 5 different steps. Here it is important that the full autonomy is not always the most economically viable situation. And I will give you an example. We have developed and trained an AI that, based on camera feeds that we have deployed in our plant, detects if someone has fallen over and might need medical assistance. Now, going to a 0% false positive rate is next to impossible, but sending out the fire brigade for every false positive is freakishly expensive. So what we are doing instead, well, we simply send a still image of video stream and send that to a human colleague to quickly assess, is there really a colleague in need, yes or no? This is a great example where full autonomy doesn't make sense, and we don't always push for that. The only thing that we are pushing for is we must not mistreat AI as a pure decision support system. And what do I mean with that? I mean, first up, we have a department like business intelligence. They already provide decision support. And the example I like to give is, if Google Maps were a decision support system, my interaction with it would be as follows. Okay, I'm currently in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the regional headquarters of Covestro, and I want to drive to Chicago. And Google Maps will tell me, hey, those are the 8,743 different ways to get from Pittsburgh to Chicago. Please review the following 8,753 different steps and tell me which one you like best. Now, I wouldn't want to do that, but this is exactly how an interaction with a decision support system looks like. What are we doing instead? Well, we've kind of developed trust in, be it Google Maps or Waze or Apple Maps or whatever favorite sat nav you have, by just telling it, bring me as fast as possible from Pittsburgh to Chicago. Don't bother telling me about the whole route up front. Just navigate me in real time where I have to go. So the second paradigm in a nutshell is, don't mistreat AI as a decision support system, but no, it doesn't always have to be a full autonomy.
I mean, those are great mantras, and that second one in particular resonates with me. At Elemental Cognition, we do neurosymbolic AI, so we're involved in a lot of decision-making systems as well, but we typically call it, human in the loop, as you mentioned, right? Like providing that photo to someone to eventually make the decision. But you don't want to show that person the 10,000 photos. You don't want to show that person 8,000 ways to get from Pittsburgh to wherever they're going. You want to give them an optimal decision, right? You put it on a plate and then you explain what the trade-offs are, right? So if you understand the trade-offs as a human as well, you're able to navigate that decision even better. And, you're able to rely on systems that can do the complex constraint optimization and all of the things that you really would struggle to do over that quantity of data. And so I think you're right. It's finding that balance between full autonomy and, decision support, where I think there's going to be the most value created in an AI. I'm looking at time, and I could talk to you for so long, Nils, because you're so interesting, but I would love to wrap up with just, for other people in this field who want to lead AI strategies in their organizations, what are some of the key pieces of advice you would give them to have a successful career?
The single best advice I give is, or I could give, is don't reduce AI to the technological aspect only. Whenever I'm asked, what is artificial intelligence? I tell people, well, I can't really tell you, because when we look at what human intelligence is, there are like 500 different definitions. So at Covestro, we've broken it down to a very simple formula. We say artificial intelligence is machine learning plus autonomy. Because machine learning, that captures very nicely the mathematical optimization and the technological piece. Autonomy is an organizational paradigm, though. That is something we have to build into the organization that is completely non-technical. We have to learn to let go to a certain extent. We have to learn to hand over decision authority to someone else. And again, staying true to what I said earlier in this anthropomorphizing approach, we already do that. When we have new hires to our company, we don't tell them, oh yes, please sign orders up to 500 million. We tell them, okay, you get to sign orders up to 5,000 euros or 50,000 euros. And if we see you do nothing nefarious while being with us for 3 to 5 years, you get 100K and 250K afterwards. So this limitations of authority is something we already have. And if you let that drive how you implement autonomy in an organization, then you move beyond the pure technological approach into something that is really meaningful for an organization, because at the end of the day, your organization is made up of humans.
I love that. In thinking about how to bring in artificial intelligence, look to how you brought in human intelligence in your organization and the governance principles you have there. That's a great thing to end on. Nils, thank you so much for your time today. That's all we have time. But before we wrap up, if people want to follow you and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn. That's the only social media profile I'm keeping.
Yeah, well, you heard it. That's Nils Janus from Covestro. You can find him on LinkedIn. If you listen to this episode, feel free to send him a DM, tell him you liked it. And feedback from me is always appreciated as well. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. And Nils, thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Ben. It was a pleasure.